immediately. There's no question that the Senate bill was put on the floor in the House of Representatives, it would pass. It would pass. And the Speaker knows that. So I call on the Speaker to let the full House speak its mind and not allow a minority of most extreme voices in the House to block this bill even from being voted on. Even from being voted on. This is a critical act for the House to move. It needs to move. The bill provides urgent funding for Ukraine so it can keep defending itself against Putin's vicious, vicious onslaught. We've all seen the terrible stories in recent weeks. Ukrainian soldiers out of artillery shells, Ukrainian units rationing rounds of ammunition to defend themselves, Ukrainian families worried that the next Russian strike will permanently plunge them into darkness or worse. This bipartisan bill sends a clear message to Ukrainians and to our partners and to our allies around the world. America can be trusted. America can be relied upon. And America stands up for freedom. We stand strong for our allies. We never bow down to anyone, and certainly not to Vladimir Putin. So let's get on with this. Remember, the United States pulled together a coalition of nearly 50 nations to support Ukraine. We unified NATO, expanded it. We can't walk away now. That's what Putin's betting on. He just flatly said that. Supporting this bill is standing up to Putin. Opposing it is playing into Putin's hands. As I've said before, the stakes in this fight extend far beyond Ukraine. If we don't stop Putin's appetite for power and control in Ukraine, he won't limit himself just to Ukraine. And the cost for America and our allies and partners is going to rise. For Republicans in Congress who think they can oppose funding for Ukraine and not be held accountable, history is watching. History is watching. History is watching. Failure to support Ukraine at this critical moment will never be forgotten. I want to be clear about something, because I know it's important to the American people. While this bill sends military equipment to Ukraine, it spends the money right here in the United States of America, in places like Arizona, where the Patriot missiles are built, in Alabama, where the Javelin missiles are built, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Texas, where artillery shells are made. And the way it works is we supply Ukraine with military equipment from our stockpiles, and then we spend our money replenishing those stockpiles so our military has access to them. Stockpiles that are made right here in America by American workers. That not only supports American jobs and American communities, it allows us to invest in maintaining and strengthening our own defense manufacturing capacity. Look, this bill meets our national security priorities in the Middle East as well. It includes greater support for our troops serving in the region, who continue to defend against militia attacks backed by Iran. It also provides Israel with what it needs to protect its people against a terrorist group like Hamas and Hezbollah and others. And it will provide life-saving humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people, who desperately need food, water, and shelter. They need help. And finally, this bill includes critical funding for our national security priorities in Asia, because even as we focus on the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, we must not take our eye off our national security challenges in the Pacific. It's the responsibility of a great nation, and we are a great nation that the rest of the world looks to. And I mean that, the rest of the world looks to us. The stakes are already high for American security before this bill was passed in the Senate last night. But in recent days, those stakes have risen. And that's because the former president has sent a dangerous and shockingly, frankly, un-American signal to the world. Just a few days ago, Trump gave an invitation to Putin to invade some of our allies, NATO allies. He said if an ally didn't spend enough money on defense, he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want, end of quote. Can you imagine a former president of the United States saying that? The whole world heard it. The worst thing is he means it. No other president in our history has ever bowed down to a Russian dictator. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I never will. For God's sake, it's dumb, it's shameful, it's dangerous, it's un-American. When America gives us word, it means something. When we make a commitment, we keep it. And NATO is a sacred commitment. Donald Trump looks at this as if it's a burden. When he looks at NATO, he doesn't see the alliance that protects America and the world. He sees a protection racket. He doesn't understand that NATO is built on the fundamental principles of freedom, security, and national sovereignty. Because for Trump, principles never matter. Everything is transactional. He doesn't understand that the sacred commitment we've given works for us as well. In fact, I would remind Trump and all those who would walk away from NATO, Article 5 has only been invoked once, just once in our NATO history, and it was done to stand with America after we were attacked on 9/11. We should never forget it. You know, our adversaries have long sought to create cracks in the alliance. The greatest hope of all those who wish America harm is for NATO to fall apart. And you can be sure that they all cheered when they heard Donald Trump and heard what he said. I know this, I will not walk away. I can't imagine any other president walking away. For as long as I'm president, if Putin attacks a NATO ally, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory. Let me close with this. You've heard me say this before. Our nation stands at an inflection point in history, where the decisions we make now are going to determine the course of our future for decades to come. This is one of those moments. And I say to the House members, House Republicans, you got to decide. Are you going to stand up for freedom? Or are you going to side with terror and tyranny? You're going to stand with Ukraine? You're going to stand with Putin? Will we stand with America or with Trump? Republicans and Democrats in the Senate came together to send a message of unity to the world. It's time for the House Republicans to do the same thing, to pass this bill immediately, to stand for decency, stand for democracy, to stand up to a so-called leader hell-bent on weakening American security. And I mean it sincerely. History is watching. History is watching. In moments like this, we have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. The world is looking to us. There's nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. In this case, acting together includes acting with our NATO allies. God bless you all. May God protect our speakers. And I promise I'll come back and answer questions later. Thank you.
Sir, when Trump said that, sir, what did Putin hear?
What's plan B if the speaker doesn't act?
Sir, the hostages.
We have been listening to President Biden discussing the foreign aid passed bill in the Senate. The bill that passed in the Senate, the president is urging Speaker Johnson to bring the legislation for a vote. He said if it was put on the floor, it would pass, and that the speaker knows that. He talked about how vital this money is for Ukraine to be able to fend off Russia. He said failure to support Ukraine would mean a victory for Vladimir Putin. President Biden also slammed former President Donald Trump's comments about NATO. He called them, quote, dumb, shameful, and dangerous. He asked House Republicans if they will stand with America or with Trump. To discuss this, I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Nicole is, of course, on Capitol Hill. Nicole, let's talk about President Biden's reaction. That was quite strong, especially in terms of addressing what Trump said about NATO. Talk to us more about why they might have taken this opportunity to remind people of what Trump said.
Well, obviously, you know, those were very controversial remarks, and I think the president continuing both from an administration standpoint, but also from a campaign standpoint, and to remind people about the danger of using that type of rhetoric. But I think in terms of the timing for this particular message, clearly the president's message was aimed squarely at the House of Representatives and squarely at House Speaker Mike Johnson, who has basically suggested that this bill that has passed the Senate, this $95 billion national security supplemental, may not be considered by the House. He said that this Senate legislation fails to meet the moment, and while he didn't explicitly say that it is dead on arrival or that he won't put it up for a vote on the floor, he did cast doubt on that. A short time ago, he was asked by reporters about the supplemental Capitol, and he continued to reiterate that he believes national security begins with border security. So the Speaker is still standing by this position and notion that any type of foreign aid package should include some type of border components, or that the border is dealt with in tandem as we prepare to send billions of dollars overseas. So whether the president's comments move the needle with Speaker Johnson remains to be seen, but it is very clear that the president, as well as congressional Democrats, are trying to put the heat on Speaker Johnson. Leader Chuck Schumer told reporters earlier today he intended to have a conversation with Speaker Johnson, urging him to step up to the plate to bring this legislation to the floor. We're expecting to hear from House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries a little later today, who just sent a letter to his colleagues reiterating the importance of this package, the funding for Israel, the funding for Ukraine, the funding for the Indo-Pacific, the humanitarian assistance for Gaza and other conflict zones, and that this bill meets the mark. And he said in this letter to his colleagues that Democrats will use all legislative tools available to them to try to get this package on the floor. So again, Democrats writ large, the White House now really trying to put the ball in Speaker Johnson's court to move this package forward.
Nicole, you're saying the Congressional, the Republicans are saying that there needs to be a border part attached to it, but the bipartisan border bill also failed. Is this just politics? Is this just kicking the can down the road, waiting to see, what former President Donald Trump tells them to do? I mean, I'm just curious about if there is nearly 24 Republicans who are favoring this package this morning. What's the disconnect in the House?
Yeah, well, it is a bit of a head scratcher, particularly for congressional Democrats and particularly for some of those in the Senate, that bipartisan group of senators who helped negotiate just a week ago this same national security package with a border compromise attached to it. And that bill, when it was presented, Speaker Johnson said it was dead on arrival. And we saw a number of Senate Republicans as well start to put some distance between themselves and this package. The main criticism and gripe of that negotiated border component was that it did not go too far, or didn't go far enough, I should say, that, many felt that this just didn't really do enough to address the problem, that they wanted to see even stricter restrictions with respect to tightening up asylum guidelines, with respect to the issue of parole beyond what was presented in this border package. And then there was also some skepticism that this package had been negotiated behind closed doors and that Republicans would be settling more for a Democratic plan, even though this included Republican proposals. And then there was real concern and skepticism about the component of the legislation that portended to suggest that the border could be shut down in emergency cases. Many Republicans arguing that the president can do that with the power he already has, that they don't need legislation in order to do that, although the White House often counters that, yes, but we need Congress to approve these policy reforms and the funding to be able to make some of these changes happen. So, while there was a lot of concern over the components of that negotiated border package, many Republicans still insist that they want the issue addressed. And that really is the point that they're trying to make in terms of their rejection of this new national security package, which no longer includes any type of border measure.
Nicole, we just heard President Biden draw a line on the sand. He said, do you stand with America or do you stand with Trump? Specifically referring to Trump, NATO, Russia, and talking about, if aid doesn't go to Ukraine, then basically you're empowering Putin. How is that resonating with Republicans? I know there is a division there. There's some Republicans that are fiercely opposed to the invasion of Ukraine, who want to fund Ukraine and help fund Ukraine in order to defend it against Russia and for purpose of U.S. national security. Is that how it's seen in Congress? I mean, is it split? Talk to me about how this line on the sand is resonating.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have to see in terms of what the House's next steps may be and whether the Speaker does make that decision to bring this new national security package to the floor. But as the president alluded to, and we also heard a similar line from Leader Schumer earlier today, they continue to insist that there is bipartisan support in both chambers to support aid to Ukraine. And historically, that has been the case, even though some of that support has waned and peeled off. I mean, look, there is a group of kind of hawkish, more defense-minded Republicans who believe it is essential to keep funding Ukraine. And then there's also a wing of the party that believes we're open to this, but we want more strings attached. We want more accountability. We want greater oversight and more answers about how this money is spent. And then there are those who just simply oppose it across the board and feel like instead of sending all of this money overseas, again, that we need to address the crises at hand at the border at home before we deal with anything else. So that's kind of the range of thought and opinion among many congressional Republicans. And you even have some, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has threatened to potentially remove the Speaker or use that motion to vacate if he even brings any type of Ukraine funding to the floor. And we know that Speaker Johnson has a very narrow majority in the House. So there are a lot of dynamics at play as the Speaker weighs this decision as to whether or not to move forward with this legislation.
Wow. Nicole Killeen, thank you for translating Congress to us. It's remarkable. We are going to take a quick break. Next on CBS News, the latest on the special election to replace George Santos's seat in Congress. This is CBS News.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember